You know, the world map, which we usually think of as something fixed and unchanging, is actually more like a living, breathing thing. Its borders, much like the coastlines of continents, are always being reshaped by the strong currents of human history. If you take a close look at an atlas from 100 years ago, or even just a few decades back, you'll spot names and countries that have since faded away, their territories absorbed, their flags lowered for the last time. These are the ghosts of the geopolitical landscape. Countries that once held power, commanded armies, and were home to millions, but now only linger in the pages of history books. The rise and fall of a nation can be as dramatic and varied as anything you'll find in the natural world. Some are torn apart by the violent tectonics of war, their very foundations shattered by conflict. Others, well, they're changed by the quieter pressures of politics, their identities merging through unification, or dissolving through peaceful separation. From mighty empires that once spanned continents to tiny kingdoms tucked away in remote valleys, the stories of their disappearance are really the stories of our ever-changing world. A reminder that the lines we draw on maps are just as fleeting as the generations that draw them. So, let's set off on a journey across time and terrain to rediscover these lost lands. We'll explore the remnants of great powers, visit the sites of short-lived unions, and trace the faint outlines of nations that have vanished from the modern atlas. Join me as we uncover the fascinating stories of 23 countries that no longer exist, and in doing so, gain a deeper understanding of the world we live in today. Our journey starts right in the heart of Europe, with a name that once inspired both respect and fear: Prussia. For centuries, this was much more than just a state. It was almost an idea, a byword for military efficiency and disciplined power. From its beginnings as a duchy on the Baltic coast, Prussia grew and grew, its influence spreading like a thick forest, until it became the driving force behind the unification of Germany in 1871. Its kings and generals, like Frederick the Great, shaped the fate of an entire continent, redrawing the map of Europe with, honestly, the sharp edge of a sword. The very core of German militarism and bureaucracy was born in the stern, austere heartlands of Prussia. The kingdom's heartland was in Brandenburg, with Berlin as its capital, but its reach stretched across what's now northern Germany and Poland. It was a state built on the backbone of its army, a society where the military wasn't just another institution, but really the central pillar of everything. The Prussian soldier, with his discipline and tough training, became almost legendary, and the state's administrative skill was second to none. Prussia championed education and science, but its soul was always tied to the battlefield. For a while, this power seemed like it would last forever, a granite fortress against the tides of change. But, the same militarism that helped Prussia rise would eventually lead to its fall. After the devastation of two world wars, both seen as having roots in Prussian aggression, the Allied powers made a historic decision. In 1947, they officially abolished the state of Prussia, calling its legacy a threat to future peace. Its lands were divided up and given to new administrative regions, and so this once mighty European power, a kingdom that really defined an era, was erased from the map, its name left only in the history books, a powerful ghost haunting modern Germany. Now let's head south to a land that rose from the ashes of empire, a nation created in the 20th century as a homeland for the South Slavic peoples Yugoslavia. For much of its existence under the charismatic and firm leadership of Marshal Tito, Yugoslavia showed the world a truly unique face. It was a socialist state, but one that stood stubbornly independent from the Soviet Union, a patchwork of cultures, languages, and religions: Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Bosniaks, Macedonians, and Montenegrins, all living together under the motto of brotherhood and unity. For a while, it looked like this delicate balance could actually work. The country was a federation of 6 republics, each with its own distinct identity, all nestled within the larger national framework. From Croatia's Adriatic coastline to the mountains of Serbia and the historic cities of Bosnia, Yugoslavia was a place of stunning natural beauty and cultural richness. Tourists flocked to its shores, and it played a big role on the world stage as a leader of the non-aligned movement. But underneath this surface unity, old tensions, ethnic and religious, lay dormant, kept in check only by Tito's strong leadership and a complex system of shared governance. After Tito died in 1980, economic and political pressures started to build, and those long-standing tensions exploded with volcanic force. the unifying ideology crumbled and aggressive nationalism took its place. In the early 1990s, Yugoslavia began to break apart violently. A series of brutal wars tore the country to pieces as one republic after another declared independence. The name Yugoslavia, once a symbol of unity, became associated with ethnic conflict and tragedy. Today, in its place stand the independent nations of Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, each one a fragment from the shattered mirror of a country that's now gone. Not every country's end comes through violence. Sometimes the decision to part ways can be as peaceful and natural as the changing of the seasons. That's exactly what happened with Czechoslovakia, a nation that appeared in the heart of Europe after the First World War, bringing together the Czech and Slovak peoples in a single democratic state. For decades, it managed to navigate the rough waters of 20th century European politics, serving as a center of industry and culture. It survived Nazi occupation and 40 years of Soviet-dominated communist rule, with its people united in their struggle for freedom. The spirit of this union really shone during the Velvet Revolution of 1989, a peaceful transition that toppled the communist regime without a single shot fired. It was a moment of huge national pride and hope. But after gaining their freedom, the separate aspirations of the Czechs and Slovaks became more obvious. Even though their languages and cultures are closely related, centuries of different historical experiences had shaped different views on things like economic policy, government, and national identity. The Czech lands were more industrial while Slovakia was more rural. Instead of letting these differences turn into conflict, the leaders chose a different path. Through careful and civil negotiations, they agreed to separate. On January 1, 1993, in what's now called the Velvet Divorce, Czechoslovakia peacefully split into two independent countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. There was no war, no bitterness, just a mutual decision to go their own ways. Today they remain close partners and allies, showing that sometimes a country can disappear from the map not with a bang, but with a quiet, respectful handshake. For 40 years, a scar ran through the heart of Germany, and honestly all of Europe. This was the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, a state created right in the crucible of the Cold War. Formed in 1949 from the Soviet occupation zone, it stood as a frontier of the Eastern Bloc, a communist state under the watchful eye of Moscow. Its capital, East Berlin, was like an island of socialism surrounded by the West, its existence physically enforced by one of the most infamous structures in modern history, the Berlin Wall. Now, this wall was more than just concrete and barbed wire. It was a stark, physical symbol of a divided world. Life in East Germany was one of, well, pretty stark contrasts. The state provided cradle-to-grave security, with guaranteed employment and housing, but, this came at the cost of personal freedom. The secret police, the Stasi, maintained a pervasive network of surveillance, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that really permeated every aspect of society. Artistic expression, travel, and political dissent were severely curtailed. Yet, despite all the repression, a unique culture developed with its own distinct products, television shows, and a shared experience of life behind the Iron Curtain. For 2 generations, this was the only reality they knew. The end, when it came, was astonishingly swift. Spurred by reforms in the Soviet Union and growing popular protests, the foundations of the East German state began to crumble in 1989. On the historic night of November 9th, the Berlin Wall was breached, not by force but by a flood of ordinary people. This single event triggered a chain reaction that proved, honestly, unstoppable. Less than a year later, on October 3, 1990, East Germany was formally dissolved as its territory was absorbed into the Federal Republic of Germany. A nation of 17 million people simply ceased to exist, reunified with its Western counterpart, and the map of Europe was, well, irrevocably changed overnight. For over 600 years, it was one of the planet's great superpowers. At its zenith, the Ottoman Empire was a colossal entity, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious domain stretching from the gates of Vienna in the north to the Persian Gulf in the east, and across the breadth of North Africa. Its capital, Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, was the vibrant heart of a vast and complex organism. The sultans who ruled from the Topkapi Palace were not just emperors, but also caliphs, leaders of the Islamic world. Their influence on art, science, law, and architecture was, honestly, profound and enduring. This vast empire was a true mosaic of peoples. Turks, Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and Jews all lived within its sprawling borders. For centuries it managed this diversity through the millet system, which allowed religious communities a degree of self-governance. The empire was a vital crossroads of trade and culture, where East and West met, sometimes clashing but just as often mingling and exchanging ideas. The call to prayer from its magnificent mosques blended with the ringing of church bells, creating a unique and complex societal soundscape. But by the 19th century, this ancient giant was weakening. Known as the sick man of Europe, the empire was plagued by internal decay, military defeats, and the rising tide of nationalism among its subject peoples. Its decline was a slow, protracted process, culminating in its fateful decision to side with the Central Powers in World War I. Defeat in the war was the final fatal blow. The victorious Allies dismantled the empire, carving up its vast territories. In 1922, the Turkish Grand National Assembly abolished the office of the Sultan, and the following year, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed. The magnificent, sprawling Ottoman Empire, a dominant feature of the world map for 6 centuries, had finally vanished. In the heart of Central Europe, another great imperial power held sway, a curious and complex entity known as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Also called the Dual Monarchy, it was a vast realm ruled by the ancient Habsburg dynasty. It was born from a compromise in 1867, which granted the Kingdom of Hungary equal status to the Austrian Empire, creating a single state with 2 distinct parliaments and governments, united only by a common monarch. This sprawling empire was a patchwork quilt of ethnicities, languages, and cultures, a place where Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Croats, and many others coexisted. Its capital, Vienna, was a glittering hub of intellectual and artistic life, home to Freud, Klimt, and Mahler. The city's grand boulevards, opulent coffee houses, and magnificent opera were, honestly, the envy of the world. Yet this cultural vibrancy masked deep and unresolved tensions. The empire was a prison of nations for many of its Slavic and Romanian subjects, who yearned for self-determination. The delicate balance of the dual monarchy was a constant political juggling act, an attempt to manage the competing demands of its dozen or so major ethnic groups within a structure dominated by Germans and Hungarians. Like its Ottoman neighbor, the Austro-Hungarian Empire's fate was sealed by the First World War. The assassination of the heir to its throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, was the spark that ignited the global conflict. 4 years of brutal warfare shattered the empire's foundations. In the autumn of 1918, facing military defeat and internal revolution, the empire collapsed. From its ruins, a host of new or resurrected nations emerged. Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and parts of its territory were incorporated into Poland, Romania, and the future Yugoslavia. The grand Habsburg experiment in multinational empire building was over, leaving behind a profoundly reshaped Central Europe. High on the remote and windswept plateau of the Himalayas lies a land that has captivated the imagination of the world for centuries, Tibet. For much of its history, it existed as a unique and independent entity, a Buddhist kingdom isolated by its formidable geography. Known as the roof of the world, its culture was deeply intertwined with its unique form of Vajrayana Buddhism. Life revolved around its monasteries, and its spiritual and political leader was the Dalai Lama, believed to be the reincarnation of a celestial being of compassion. For centuries, Tibet maintained its own government, laws, currency, and army, a distinct civilization in the shadow of the world's highest peaks. This mountain kingdom intentionally pursued a policy of isolation, seeking to preserve its unique spiritual culture from outside influence. Foreigners were rarely permitted entry, adding to its mystique in the West as a fabled, forbidden land of peace and wisdom, a real-life Shangri-La. Its capital, Lhasa, with the magnificent Potala Palace towering over the city, was the sacred heart of this devout nation. The rhythms of life were dictated by prayer, pilgrimage, and the harsh realities of survival at extreme altitudes. This was a nation that existed on a different plane both geographically and spiritually. This long-standing independence came to an abrupt and tragic end in the mid-20th century. In 1950, the newly established People's Republic of China invaded, claiming Tibet as a historical part of its territory. After a failed uprising in 1959, the 14th Dalai Lama fled into exile in India, and China solidified its control, formally annexing the region. While China designates it as the Tibet Autonomous Region, for many Tibetans and international observers, the country of Tibet effectively ceased to exist as a sovereign nation. Its flag is forbidden within its own borders, and its unique culture remains under immense pressure, a lost kingdom on the roof of the world. Nestled in the lap of the Himalayas, between Nepal, Bhutan, and Tibet, lay the small and secluded kingdom of Sikkim. For over 300 years it was ruled by a line of monarchs known as the Chogyal, meaning righteous ruler. This tiny nation was a place of extraordinary biodiversity, a wonderland of lush valleys, rhododendron forests, and snow-capped peaks, dominated by the sacred mountain, Kangchenjunga. Its culture was a gentle blend of Tibetan Buddhism and local traditions, a peaceful and deeply spiritual society that had managed to maintain its independence for centuries, sheltered by the immense mountains that surrounded it. Sikkim's strategic location, however, made it an area of interest for its much larger neighbors. After British India established its dominance in the region, Sikkim became a protectorate, retaining its internal autonomy while its defense and foreign affairs were managed by the British. When India gained independence in 1947, this protectorate status was transferred to the new government in New Delhi. For a time the arrangement continued, with the Chogyal ruling over a sovereign kingdom that was in effect sheltered under India's wing. The kingdom even had its own seat at the United Nations, and was recognized internationally. By the early 1970s political turmoil began to brew within the kingdom, fueled by tensions between the Bhutia Lepcha minority, who supported the monarchy, and the growing Nepali majority, who favored closer ties with India. In 1975, the Indian army entered the capital, Gangtok, and disarmed the palace guard. A controversial referendum was hastily arranged, the result of which was an overwhelming vote to abolish the monarchy and merge with India. On May 16, 1975, Sikkim was formally absorbed into the Indian Union as its 22nd state. The ancient kingdom of the Chogyals had vanished, its sovereignty ceded to its powerful neighbor. In southern Africa, a nation existed for 15 years that was recognized by almost no one, yet it maintained a government, an army, and a distinct identity. This was Rhodesia, a state born from the legacy of British colonialism. The territory, formerly the self-governing colony of southern Rhodesia, had a significant white minority population that held political and economic power. As the winds of change swept across Africa in the 1960s, and Britain pushed for majority rule, the white-led government in Rhodesia resisted, determined to maintain its control. In 1965, fearing the imposition of black majority rule, the government of Prime Minister Ian Smith made a dramatic move. It issued a unilateral declaration of independence from Britain, creating the state of Rhodesia. This act was condemned internationally. The United Nations imposed sweeping economic sanctions, and Britain declared it an act of rebellion. For the next decade and a half, Rhodesia was a pariah state, locked in a struggle for survival. It faced not only diplomatic isolation but also an escalating and brutal guerrilla war, known as the Bush War, waged by black nationalist groups fighting for liberation. The relentless pressure of sanctions and the brutal cost of the war eventually forced the government to the negotiating table. After a brief period as the transitional state of Zimbabwe-Rhodesia, a settlement was finally reached. In 1980, internationally supervised elections were held, leading to a decisive victory for the nationalist forces. The country was granted formal independence by Britain and renamed Zimbabwe. The flag of Rhodesia was lowered for the last time, and the 15-year existence of this internationally unrecognized breakaway state came to a definitive end, closing a painful chapter of colonial history in Africa. For 2 decades, the world map showed 2 Vietnams divided at the 17th parallel. In the south was the Republic of Vietnam, commonly known as South Vietnam. Established in 1955 after the end of French colonial rule, it was an anti-communist state, with its capital in the bustling city of Saigon. From its very inception, South Vietnam was embroiled in conflict. It was propped up by the United States and its allies, who saw it as a crucial bulwark against the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, a key domino in the Cold War. Life in South Vietnam was a paradox of war and vibrancy. While the countryside was ravaged by the relentless fighting of the Vietnam War, Cities like Saigon throbbed with a unique energy, a blend of French colonial elegance, American influence, and traditional Vietnamese culture. It had its own government, a powerful army, and a distinct national identity forged in opposition to its northern rival, the Communist Democratic Republic of Vietnam, or North Vietnam. For millions of South Vietnamese, their republic was their homeland, a cause for which they fought and died. But the nation was built on a foundation of political instability and was entirely dependent on American support. When the United States began to withdraw its forces in the early 1970s, the fate of South Vietnam was sealed. In the spring of 1975, North Vietnam launched a final, massive offensive. The South Vietnamese army, despite its numbers and equipment, crumbled. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon. The city was renamed Ho Chi Minh City, and South Vietnam ceased to exist. The two Vietnams were officially reunified under communist rule the following year, ending a brutal war and wiping a country from the map. Sometimes countries are not lost to war or dissolution, but to a dream of something greater. Such was the case with the United Arab Republic, or UAR. It appeared on the world map in 1958, a bold political experiment born from the tide of pan-Arab nationalism that was sweeping the Middle East. The UAR was a sovereign state formed by the union of two geographically separate nations, Egypt and Syria. The driving force behind this venture was the charismatic Egyptian president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, a towering figure in the Arab world who dreamed of a single, powerful Arab nation. The union was greeted with immense popular enthusiasm, particularly in Syria, where crowds celebrated what they saw as the first step towards unifying the entire Arab world. Damascus and Cairo became the twin capitals of this new sprawling state. The UAR adopted a new flag, combining the red, white, and black of the Arab Liberation Flag with two green stars, representing its two founding regions. For a brief moment it seemed that Nasser's powerful vision was becoming a reality, a new power bloc emerging in the heart of the Middle East, independent of both Cold War superpowers. However, the dream was short-lived. The practicalities of merging two distinct countries, separated by other nations, proved immensely difficult. The union was dominated by Egypt, which was much larger and more powerful. Syrian politicians, military officers, and business leaders grew resentful of what they saw as a takeover by Cairo. The centralized socialist policies imposed by Nasser clashed with Syria's more free-market traditions. In September 1961, just 3.5 years after its formation, a military coup in Syria led to its secession from the Union. While Egypt continued to call itself the UAR until 1971, the ambitious two-state republic had effectively vanished, a fleeting but fascinating chapter in the quest for Arab unity. In the early 19th century, a vast new nation emerged in South America from the crucible of the wars of independence against Spain. This was Gran Colombia, the ambitious creation of the great liberator, Simon Bolivar. His dream was not just to free the colonies from Spanish rule, but to unite them into a single powerful republic that could stand as an equal on the world stage. At its greatest extent, Gran Colombia encompassed a huge territory, including most of modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, as well as parts of northern Peru and northwestern Brazil. It was a superstate born of revolutionary fervor. With its capital in Bogotá, Gran Colombia was a bold attempt to forge a unified identity from the diverse regions and peoples of northern South America. Bolivar, its first president, envisioned it as a bastion of liberty and a model for the rest of the continent. The new nation had a constitution, a flag, and an army that had proven its mettle against the might of the Spanish Empire. For a decade, it seemed that this grand experiment in nation-building might succeed, creating a powerful new player in the Americas. However, the immense geographical barriers of the Andes Mountains and the Amazon rainforest made communication and governance incredibly difficult. Regional identities and the ambitions of local leaders proved stronger than the ideal of a unified republic. Tensions grew between the central government in Bogotá and the leaders in Venezuela and Ecuador. After years of political infighting and internal strife, the great dream crumbled. In 1831, Gran Colombia formally dissolved, fracturing into the new republics of Venezuela, Ecuador, and New Granada, which would later become Colombia, from which Panama would eventually secede. Bolivar's magnificent vision of a united South American power had vanished. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, a unique and ancient Polynesian culture thrived for 1,000 years in splendid isolation. This was the Kingdom of Hawaii, a sovereign nation formed in 1795 when the warrior chief Kamehameha the Great united the Hawaiian Islands. For nearly a century, Hawaii was a recognized member of the family of nations, with its own monarchy, constitution, and diplomatic relations with countries across the globe. Its capital, Honolulu, became a vital port for whalers, merchants, and travelers crossing the Pacific. The kingdom was ruled by a succession of kings and queens, who sought to navigate the complex currents of Western expansion while preserving their nation's independence and unique cultural heritage. They embraced modernization, adopting Western legal and political systems, but always struggled against the growing influence of foreign powers, particularly the United States. American business interests, primarily in the form of sugar plantations, grew to dominate the island's economy, creating a powerful lobby that increasingly saw Hawaiian sovereignty as an obstacle to its ambitions. The end of the kingdom came in 1893. A group of American and European businessmen, with the support of United States Marines, staged a coup and overthrew the reigning monarch, Queen Liliuokalani. They established a provisional government and sought annexation by the United States. Despite the Queen's protests and initial opposition from President Grover Cleveland, the push for annexation was relentless. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, the United States formally annexed the islands. The independent Kingdom of Hawaii, with its proud and ancient lineage, was no more, its flag replaced by the Stars and Stripes. Tucked away on the border between France and Germany is a small but historically significant region, rich in coal and industry, the Saarland. Due to its valuable resources and strategic location, its fate has often been caught between the ambitions of its two powerful neighbors. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles separated the Saar from Germany, placing it under the administration of the League of Nations for 15 years. This created a unique political entity, not quite a country, but a territory with its own governing commission, a temporary statelet whose future was yet to be decided. After this 15-year period, a plebiscite was held in 1935, and the people of the Saar voted overwhelmingly to rejoin Germany, a decision that was a major propaganda victory for the Nazi regime. However, after the devastation of World War II, the region's status was once again in question. Seeking economic reparations and a buffer against future German aggression, France occupied the region and established the Saar Protectorate in 1947. This new entity was politically autonomous but economically integrated with France. It had its own constitution, its own flag, and even competed as a separate nation in the 1952 Summer Olympics. For a decade, the Saar Protectorate existed in this state of limbo. France promoted a vision of an independent Saar state, a permanently neutral buffer between the two historic rivals. However, the majority of the population retained their strong German cultural and linguistic identity. In another referendum, held in 1955, the people of the Saar rejected the plan for an independent state and voted instead for reunification with West Germany. On January 1, 1957, the Saar Protectorate was dissolved and became a state within the Federal Republic of Germany, once again closing the chapter on its brief and contested existence as a separate territory. On the rugged, windswept northeastern edge of North America lies a large island, a place of stark beauty and resilient people. This is Newfoundland. For centuries it was a British colony, its existence defined by the rich cod fisheries of the Grand Banks. In 1907 it was granted Dominion status, becoming a self-governing country within the British Empire, on an equal footing with nations like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The Dominion of Newfoundland had its own prime minister, its own parliament in St. John's, and proudly sent its own regiment to fight in the First World War. The Dominion was a proud and independent nation, with a distinct culture and dialect shaped by centuries of isolation and a close relationship with the sea. Its people were known for their hardiness and independence. However, the country faced severe economic challenges. Its reliance on the fishing industry made it vulnerable, and it was hit exceptionally hard by the Great Depression of the 1930s. The government fell deep into debt, and the country was on the brink of economic collapse, unable to meet its obligations. Facing bankruptcy, Newfoundland made a difficult and unusual decision. In 1934, it voluntarily gave up its self-governing status and reverted to being ruled directly from London by an appointed commission of government. After World War II, its future was again debated. Two closely fought referendums were held in 1948 to decide its fate. The options were to remain under the Commission, return to independent Dominion status, or join the neighboring Confederation of Canada. In a narrow result, the people chose to join Canada. On March 31, 1949, the Dominion of Newfoundland ceased to exist, becoming Canada's 10th province. In the very heart of Africa lies a vast nation, a place of immense natural wealth and a history marked by turmoil. Today we know it as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but for a quarter of a century it bore a different name on the world's maps, Zaire. This name change was the work of one man, Mobutu Sese Seko, the country's long-serving and well-authoritarian ruler. He seized power in a 1965 coup, 5 years after the country had gained a chaotic independence from Belgium. In 1971, as part of a sweeping campaign of authenticity, Mobutu sought to purge the country of its colonial-era names and influences. The nation of Congo was renamed the Republic of Zaire, a name derived from an old Portuguese mispronunciation of the Congo River's local name. The river itself was renamed the Zaire River, and the currency became the Zaire. Citizens were forced to adopt African names, and the European-style suit was banned in favor of a tunic called the abacost. The nation's identity was, honestly, completely remade in Mobutu's image. For 26 years, the country was known as Zaire. It was a period defined by Mobutu's absolute power, immense corruption, and lavish cult of personality, all while the nation's economy and infrastructure crumbled. The name Zaire became synonymous with his kleptocratic rule. His reign finally came to an end in 1997, when he was overthrown in a rebellion led by Laurent Désiré Kabila. One of the new leader's first acts was to erase the symbols of the old regime. The country was immediately renamed the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The name Zaire, so closely tied to one man's rule, was wiped from the map, a ghost of a more recent and painful past. Not all vanished countries are the result of mergers or peaceful dissolutions. Some are born from desperate struggles and honestly are extinguished in tragedy. Such is the story of the Republic of Biafra. In 1967, the southeastern region of Nigeria, populated mainly by the Igbo people, declared its independence. This secession came after 2 military coups and horrific ethnic massacres in which tens of thousands of Igbos living in northern Nigeria were killed. Fearing for their survival, the Igbo-dominated eastern region led by Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu broke away to form its own nation Biafra. The birth of Biafra was an act of self-preservation, but it was immediately met with the full force of the Nigerian federal government, which was determined to prevent the country from breaking apart. This triggered the Nigerian Civil War, a brutal and devastating conflict that lasted for 2.5 years. The Nigerian military imposed a complete blockade on the fledgling republic, cutting off food, medicine, and supplies. Biafra, though recognized by a handful of other countries, was largely isolated on the world stage. The consequence of the blockade was a catastrophic famine. Harrowing images of starving Biafran children with bloated bellies were broadcast around the world, bringing the humanitarian crisis to global attention and sparking a massive international relief effort. But it was not enough. The Biafran forces, outgunned and starving, could not hold out. In January 1970 they surrendered. The Republic of Biafra ceased to exist, its territory reabsorbed into Nigeria. It remains a deeply painful memory, a testament to a failed and tragic struggle for statehood. On the east coast of Africa, 2 newly independent nations emerged from British rule in the early 1960s. One was Tanganyika, a vast mainland territory encompassing the Serengeti Plains and Mount Kilimanjaro. The other was Zanzibar, a small archipelago just off the coast, a historic center of the spice trade with a culture heavily influenced by Arab and Persian traders. Tanganyika gained its independence peacefully in 1961, led by the respected statesman Julius Nyerere. Zanzibar followed in 1963, but its independence was immediately fraught with tension. Just a month after Zanzibar became independent as a constitutional monarchy under its Arab Sultan, a violent revolution erupted. The island's African majority overthrew the Sultanate in a bloody coup, establishing a new revolutionary government. This new government was socialist and had ties to the Eastern Bloc, which caused considerable alarm in the West and among its mainland neighbors during the Cold War. There were fears that Zanzibar could become a Cuba of Africa, a base for communist influence in the region. To forestall this and to promote a vision of Pan-African unity, Tanganyika's President Nyerere moved quickly. He proposed a union between the two nations. In April 1964, just a few months after the revolution, the leaders of Tanganyika and Zanzibar signed an act of union. A new, unified country was formed. To reflect this merger, a new name was created by combining the first syllables of the two founding states, Tan from Tanganyika and Zan from Zanzibar. And so, the United Republic of Tanzania was born, and the separate nations of Tanganyika and Zanzibar vanished from the map, merged into a single entity. There is a region in Eastern Europe whose very name conjures images of Gothic castles and dark legends, but its real history is one of shifting allegiances and contested identity. This is Transylvania. For much of its history, it was not an independent country, but an autonomous principality, a distinct entity within the larger Kingdom of Hungary. It was a multi-ethnic land, home to Hungarians, Romanians and Germans, each with their own rich cultural traditions. For centuries, it existed in this state, a self-governing province under the Hungarian crown. The fate of Transylvania was dramatically altered by the outcome of World War I, with the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, of which the Kingdom of Hungary was a part. The ethnic Romanians of Transylvania, who constituted the majority of the population, voted to unite with the neighboring Kingdom of Romania. The 1920 Treaty of Trianon formalized this transfer, and the entire historic region of Transylvania was incorporated into Romania. For Hungary, this was a national trauma, the loss of a territory that had been central to its history for 1,000 years. The story did not end there. During World War II, under pressure from Nazi Germany, Romania was forced to cede the northern half of Transylvania back to Hungary in 1940. This division was a source of immense bitterness and led to population exchanges and persecution on both sides. After the war, however, the Paris Peace Treaties of 1947 definitively overturned this decision, and the entirety of Transylvania was returned to Romanian sovereignty. While never truly a country in the modern sense for a prolonged period, its status as a distinct principality vanished, its borders shifting with the turbulent tides of European history. On the Baltic coast, at the mouth of the Vistula River, lies the great port city of Gdansk. For 2 decades between the world wars, this city and its surrounding territory existed as a unique political creation, the Free City of Danzig. Established by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, it was an attempt to solve an intractable problem. The new nation of Poland needed access to the sea, but the city's population was overwhelmingly German. The solution was to create a semi-autonomous city-state under the protection of the League of Nations, which would be neither German nor Polish. This free city had its own constitution, its own currency, and its own flag. It was a bustling port, its fortunes tied to Polish trade, yet its people and politics were German. This created a permanent state of tension. Poland controlled its railways and had rights to its port, while Germany viewed its separation as a national humiliation and a violation of self-determination. The city became a flashpoint of nationalist friction, a microcosm of the unresolved conflicts left over from the Great War. The rise of the Nazi Party in Germany dramatically escalated these tensions. The local Danzig Nazi Party gained control of the city's government and agitated for its return to Germany. The city's status became one of Adolf Hitler's key demands in the lead-up to World War II. Indeed, the very first shots of the war in Europe were fired here on September 1, 1939, when a German battleship shelled a Polish military depot. The city was immediately annexed by Germany. After the war, with Germany's defeat, the city was placed under Polish administration, its German population was expelled, and it was renamed Gdansk. The unique entity of the Free City of Danzig was gone forever. For nearly a decade in the 19th century, a vast and independent nation existed in North America, stretching all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Rocky Mountains. This was the Republic of Texas. It was born in 1836 when American settlers and Tejanos, Texans of Mexican descent, rebelled against the centralized rule of Mexican President Santa Anna. After a short but legendary war for independence, marked by the famous Battle of the Alamo and the decisive victory at San Jacinto, the rebels declared the formation of a new sovereign nation. The Republic of Texas, with its iconic Lone Star flag, faced a challenging existence. It was a sprawling, sparsely populated frontier nation. Its government, led by presidents like Sam Houston, sought international recognition and struggled with financial instability and constant threats from Mexico, which refused to recognize its independence. The republic had its own army, its own navy, and its own currency, and it established diplomatic ties with several European nations as well as the United States. However, the majority of its Anglo-American population had always favored joining the United States. The question of annexation was a contentious issue in Washington, primarily due to the issue of slavery, which was legal in Texas, and the fear of provoking a war with Mexico. Eventually, the political winds shifted. In 1845, the U.S. Congress approved the annexation of Texas. On December 29, 1845, the Republic of Texas lowered its flag for the last time and was admitted to the Union as the 28th state. Its 9-year run as an independent country came to an end, an event that would directly lead to the Mexican-American War. No vanished country is more central to the history of the United States than the one that sought to break it apart, the Confederate States of America. Formed in 1861, the Confederacy was a republic established by 11 southern states that seceded from the Union. The primary and explicitly stated cause for this secession was the preservation of the institution of chattel slavery, which the southern states feared was threatened by the election of President Abraham Lincoln and the rise of the anti-slavery Republican Party. With its capital first in Montgomery, Alabama and later in Richmond, Virginia, the Confederacy established its own government, constitution, army, and currency. It was led by President Jefferson Davis and famed generals like Robert E. Lee. For 4 years, it fought a bitter and bloody war against the United States, the American Civil War, the deadliest conflict in American history. The Confederacy sought international recognition, particularly from Britain and France, hoping that the European powers' dependence on southern cotton would lead them to intervene on its behalf. This recognition, however, never came. The Union's superior industrial strength, larger population, and naval blockade eventually proved decisive. After 4 years of brutal fighting that devastated the South, the Confederacy's principal army, under General Lee, surrendered in April 1865. The Confederate government collapsed, and its territory was placed under federal military occupation during a period known as Reconstruction. The attempt to create a separate slaveholding republic had failed. The Confederate States of America was dissolved, and its states were readmitted to the Union, but the legacy of this vanished nation continues to profoundly influence American society and politics to this day. Our final vanished country is a curious case, a nation that disappeared not through defeat or collapse but through its own ultimate success. This was the Kingdom of Sardinia, also known as Piedmont Sardinia. While its name suggests an island kingdom, its political and economic heartland was on the mainland in the Piedmont region of northern Italy, with its capital at Turin. In the mid-19th century, it was the most modern and militarily powerful of the many independent states that existed on the Italian peninsula. Under the leadership of its savvy prime minister Count Camillo di Cavour and its king Victor Emmanuel II, the Kingdom of Sardinia became the engine of the Italian unification movement, the Risorgimento. Through shrewd diplomacy, strategic alliances, and a series of successful wars against the Austrian Empire, Cavour expanded the kingdom's territory, absorbing Lombardy, Tuscany, and other central Italian states. The kingdom's goal was not merely to grow, but to become the nucleus of a brand new, unified nation. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place with the legendary expedition of Giuseppe Garibaldi, who conquered the kingdom of the Two Sicilies in the south and handed it over to King Victor Emmanuel II. With the peninsula now almost entirely under its control, the Kingdom of Sardinia performed its final, transformative act. In 1861 it proclaimed the birth of a new nation, the Kingdom of Italy, with Victor Emmanuel II as its first king. In achieving its grandest ambition, the Kingdom of Sardinia effectively voted itself out of existence, its name and flag subsumed into the larger identity of the united Italy it had so masterfully created. As our journey through time comes to a close, we're left with a pretty profound realization. The map of the world is not a fixed and final document, but really just a snapshot of a single moment in a long, continuous story of creation and dissolution. The borders we see today are merely the latest chapter. The stories of Prussia, Yugoslavia, and the Ottoman Empire remind us that great powers can crumble and that the forces of war and nationalism are powerful agents of change. The tales of Czechoslovakia and Newfoundland show that nations can also transform peacefully through negotiation and the will of their people. These 23 nations, and countless others throughout history, are more than just forgotten names. They're echoes of different possibilities, of dreams realized and ambitions thwarted. From the grand vision of Gran Colombia to the tragic struggle of Biafra, each vanished country leaves behind a legacy that continues to shape the identities, politics, and even the grievances of the regions they once occupied. They are ghosts in the machine of history, their stories serving as a crucial reminder that the world is in a constant state of flux, and the political geography we take for granted is anything but permanent. The map will continue to change. New nations may be born, and old ones may yet disappear. History is always being written, its lines drawn and redrawn across the surface of our planet. So, which of these vanished countries surprised you the most? Is there a lost nation we didn't cover that you find fascinating? Please, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this exploration of our world's forgotten corners, be sure to